If you enjoy our videos and podcasts and would like us to continue putting out regular quality content, head over to patreon.com/aircrewinterview, where you can donate monthly, and in return you will get rewards ranging from early interview viewings, bonus clips, credited as a producer, and much more. Thank you and enjoy. So Caroline, I want to thank you very much for inviting me into your home, and it's I think it's the 4th episode of Happy Hour now, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So
it's lovely to see you.
What's been happening since the last time we spoke? I think our first interview was it 2016? Something like that?
Yeah, it was back there, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was at Newark Museum with XV490.
Mm-hmm.
And what a change that cockpit's gone through now. It looks absolutely amazing with its new colour scheme and things. But it seems a long time ago, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So what have you been up to?
Lots of things have happened since then. I brought my book out.
True Colours.
True Colours. So that came out in 2017. And I've been part of other books since then. But I still continue to do public speaking. So I do lots of talks to various groups and organisations, ranging from schools, colleges, universities, through to businesses, and including militaries and things. So I do a lot of that. But also I still stay connected to aviation through the European Defence Agency, and I'm still contracted to teach European military helicopter crews, tactics and platform protection and electronic warfare, which is a part of my year that I look forward to very much. So we teach the helicopter tactics instructors course, which is teaching people to go back to their squadrons to be instructors on tactics and electronic warfare. That's gone through a lot of change since then. It's only one course a year for the instructors course. They run slightly smaller courses as well, but the main one that I get involved with is that one. It was something that I started doing when I was in the Air Force. So having left in 2014, for the last 2 years within the Air Force, we started teaching European Defence Agency crews. And when I left in 2014, I was subcontracted back to carry on doing that. So I must have been doing something right, because they liked what I did, which is brilliant because it keeps me connected to all of the skills that I used to have in the military, where I can still use those and still pass on that knowledge and skill set, which is really good. So we normally run the instructors course out of RAF Linton on News. So up there we have the ground school and the simulator phase. There's 14 nations signed up to the European Defence Agency helicopter training programme. So we get predominantly German, Swedish, Austrian, but we get Estonians, Czechs, Hungarians, all sorts of different nationalities on the course, which is, and the second part of the course is the flying phase, and we move to Sweden. So we got up to Vidsel or Arvidsjaur, which is right up in the north end of Sweden. So not so many noise complaints around up there. That's what we are told. But actually, we do get more noise complaints than we anticipated, shall we say. And we do a month for flying up there. So and we do all sorts from teaching evasion from fighters, and the fighters are normally provided by 100 Squadron Hawks, or the Gripens, or the Alkas from the Czech Republic. Send some Alkas up there. We also do evasion against ground-based threat systems, so real threat systems, as well as simulated ones. And we do a whole training program up there, which is, because I left the Air Force, I'm no longer able to instruct in flight. So I do ground instruction and help manage the course and put the packages together. So designing the mission plans and all that kind of stuff, and helping with the debrief, and still instructing on the ground side. But I don't actually put my little pink body up in the skies anymore.
So before we move on, what are we drinking at the moment, Caroline? You poured it as a nice gin. So what is it?
It's a very good question. I can't remember the name of it. I know it's an English gin. It comes from Kent. It's from Tenterden, and the wine we were I tasted earlier was also from the same area, Tenterden in Kent. So I prefer wine, I must admit. And I think English wines these days are absolutely amazing. They're award-winning, wonderful wines. So I do like my English whites. And so I was drinking Bacchus from there. And the wine comes from the same vineyard. They do gin as well. But I can't remember what it's called.
We'll figure that one out later, folks.
I only gave you a small portion, didn't I? So, and it's a fever tree, cucumber, tonic. Yeah. It's very nice, I thought. You can taste the cucumber, can't you?
You definitely can, yeah. But you talked that you work with the Griffins. What were they like to fly against?
Griffins are great. They're quite difficult, actually, because the only advantage is they tend to stay a little bit higher than a hawk. Hawks tend to like to stay visual, and to stay visual, to find you, they like coming down low and skylining you if they can. And then once they found you, then they'll use the vertical. Whereas the Griffin's got a very good radar on it, so it's able to detect us overland. But also, it's not much bigger than a hawk. So when you're going against platforms like Typhoon or F-15 and things, those aeroplanes, especially when they start turning, you see lots of surface area, lots of wing, and so they're easier to track around the skies. And they're quite big coming towards you as well, so you can generally pick them up a little bit further out than something like a hawk. The advantage of hawk is its size, and it's in amongst the package before anybody knows it's there. And the Griffins like that, actually head on, very, very, very small profile. So you don't see it until it's a bit too late, but it's a very capable platform. It's got a very good radar on it. It's got some very good weapons on it, and it turns very, very well.
Yeah.
So the good thing about flying these kind of missions, though, is actually if you fly the aircraft well, and bear in mind when we do this training, we're telling the offensive platforms, the fighters, exactly where we are. So they otherwise we won't get the training.
Yeah.
Because helicopters can hide from those kinds of, even with radars, very good radars and things. If you use the ground, it depends on the terrain, the background, all that kind of stuff, obviously. But if all of that's in your favour, it's very difficult to find a helicopter even today with really good modern radar systems. So you can exploit that, and it's teaching how to exploit that is what we do. And it's very rewarding for the crews to come through a fight and having to go up against a modern generation platform and tell them where you are because they can't find you. They're
always good.
They always like that. Yeah. We're over here. We're just under you now. Kind of thing. Of course, it's not always that way. Sometimes we get shot completely unseen. But it's not. There's a perception that a helicopter against an agile fighter, or agile fighter's worse than a big shooter, a sort of intercept platform, which isn't going to sort of be able to turn with helicopters so well. Perhaps, but it's not game over in a helicopter by all means. And a lot of helicopters these days, I've got something that bites back as well, so they have to be wary of that.
But I think for me, there's a lot of people like who know you from the F4 days. What was the F4 like to operate?
I loved it.
I mean, we've got the Black Mike Air picture over there, but like it's awesome, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely fabulous.
Yeah.
I did 12 years fast jets, and then the only reason I switched to helicopters was because the F4 was going out of service at that time, so I had to choose a different aeroplane type. But also, I as a child, I'd seen helicopters and thought you'd have to be crazy to fly those. So there was kind of a kind of madness about wanting to go and fly them. And so I had this opportunity to change and do something completely different. And at the same time, the Air Force was asking for fast jet navigators to switch across to helicopters. So I gave it a go, and I loved helicopters just as much. It's people sometimes ask me which is my favourite, which I prefer, but it's because they're so completely different.
Is it like
you
asking, like,
can't.
which is your favourite child kind of thing?
Yeah. It is a little bit like that.
Yeah.
But I just absolutely made up, and I feel it's privileged to be able to be involved with the F4. That was a wonderful aeroplane, and I had a fantastic time flying it. I went from F4s to Hawks, so I did 3 years down at Chivener on the TAC Weapons Unit, which was brilliant. So we're taking baby pilots who have finished on the Hawk at Valley, so they've done their advanced flying training, and before they go off to operational conversion units on type, then we're sort of teaching them tactics and tactical flying and weaponeering and all those kinds of skills. So I was involved with that down at Chivener for 3 years, so I got to fly the Hawk, which was absolutely brilliant. And we had a war role in those days as well. We did mixed fighter force, so we would hang on the wing of a big jet going into a fight, and the big jets, an F4 or an F3 or an F15 or something, would blow through the fight, taking head-on shots, and the Hawks would just peel off and wrap up and have a little bun fight before running out of fuel and going home, and running out of missiles because we didn't carry 2 missiles and a gun. If we're lucky.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
But it was great fun. So it was a really good opportunity, having done all of that, to switch to helicopters. Had the F4 still been in service, I think I would have gone back to F4s at that point. But I had a marvellous career on helicopters, and I switched to helicopters in '93. And I stayed with them till 2014. I was quite lucky. I was one of those rare people. There's a few of us around who stayed flying for our whole career. So 35 years in the Air Force, and all of it was in flying roles, bar a year and a half, which I took out for life adjustments. Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
So why didn't you want to go on to F3s as a nav? Like, was it helicopters or like? Tell us about that.
Well, the F3 was the new kid on the block, but the F2 had come in first, and it wasn't getting a really good reputation. And I it wasn't so much that I didn't want to fly that aeroplane. It was just following. I always like to leave things on a high, and for me the Phantom was a high, and I didn't want to be disappointed and going on to something that was not quite the same. But also the overriding factor was the fact that I quite fancied helicopters, just for a change. Trooping helicopters, tactical helicopters, down in the weeds, completely different kind of way of flying. On the F4, I'd done helicopter refill. So we used to work up helicopters that were going out to the Falkland Islands, for instance, or going on operations elsewhere, Bosnia, places like that. I'd been the hunter, looking for helicopters, mostly Lynx, seeking Chinook occasionally. So it was quite interesting to switch into that platform, and then teach. I got very quickly involved. One of the reasons they wanted fast jet navigators across into helicopters was on the tactical side. So it was almost kind of expected to go into a tactical role. So as soon as I joined, I went off and did the very next available helicopter tactics course, and that became my speciality for the next 21 years.
But what was it like coming from a supersonic jet to, slow moving,
well, I had that work down. I had that work down from Phantoms to Hawks.
Right.
So I was going in the right direction a little bit. So I went supersonic down to subsonic down to, creeping along the ground.
I can imagine that was different,
Yeah, because the first aircraft I went into was the Wessex.
Wessex,
19 knots.
Not a very great looking aircraft, is it?
I love it.
You love it?
It is a wonderful helicopter.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful, very forgiving, very easy to fly. It was used as a trainer for the advanced part of the flying training system, as well as in a trooping role. Lovely aeroplane. It does look a little bit prehistoric in many ways,
yeah.
but it's kind of cute. I think that's
Yeah.
kind of cute. But 90 knots. But 90 knots now was down at treetop level or below. And when you're doing 90 knots down in amongst the trees, that's quite just as exhilarating. In fact, in many ways more than doing 420 knots at 250 feet.
Yeah, we experienced the speed, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a completely different way of flying. So we, in those days, we used to fly pretty much most places at 50 feet. And then when we're doing the final part of our approach to pick up troops or to drop them off, we do what we call the concealed approach and departure, which was using the terrain, the wind, the light and everything, shadow, whatever was out there, to sneak in the last little bit so you could drop the troops off without them being seen, because they want to get in and do their business without a big helicopter hovering over the top saying, look, this is where we are. So that was quite taxing, because when you're flying a little bit high, even 100 feet, even 250 feet, when you're looking at trees, you can see shape, you can see shapes of woods. So you can see it's a diamond shaped wood, you can see it's a circular shaped wood, you can see it's just a forest that extends forever. When you're down at the same height as the trees, you see a tree, or lots of trees, you see the side of the tree, it's like there's no shape to it. So is that the trees on this hillside, or is that the trees on that hillside? You know, it gets a little bit more kind of challenging, the navigation side of things. And of course, in an F4, I didn't really do that much of that kind of navigation, visual navigation, because I was working the radar, and the pilot was normally better placed to look at a 1/4 mil map and big picture, see which way we're going across the ground. Whereas in a helicopter, well, the Hawk was great because we bumped it down and we're doing visual nav, 420 knot target runs, but still at 250 feet. But it was good to have that practice, timings and things. We didn't do timings. F4s as fighters, you're just going to get airborne and go and see what's out there and have a play with it. So you don't actually run to mission timelines. You don't have to be at a target place at a particular time. You might have to go on cap at a particular time, you might have to come off cap at a particular time, those kinds of things. There's a little bit of time, but it's not like you're running a mission looking at timelines across the ground, unless you're doing a fly past or something like this, then you would do that. Whereas for the Hawks we did mud moving stuff, so we were doing IP to targets and visual nav and lines on maps and things, but we were also doing the air defense stuff, the air combat, which was absolutely fabulous. I used to the joy of being on the squadron at that point was I was a flight commander for baby nabs that were coming through, getting a workup for fast jets, but I would also fly with the trainee pilots to give them an idea of working as a crew now, because they'd always flown with another pilot and not necessarily as a crew, but with an instructor. So I'd fly with them to do that. But I could look at the program, I could walk in and go, oh, air combat, I like that. Oh, an air defense sortie, a bounce, yeah, I'll go on that and that. And I would fly 3-4 times a day, and it was just absolutely fantastic fun.
But how did their F4 fare against, you know, the F-15s or the F-16s at the time?
The age-old question.
The age-old question.
Oh, well, we used to go to ACMI, and I've got my logbook behind you, and I can show you that later. But we've got, I've got, looking through that, at ACMI, we would go off and do workups against similar type. So we'd go F4 v F4, 1v1, and then we would go 2v1, or 1v2, or 2v2, or 2v2v2, and build up. And then we'd do dissimilar, so whoever else was out there doing their training, we would fight against. And so there was F-15s, F-104s, F-16s, F-14s, all sorts of different types.
Against the F-14?
Yeah.
How did you fight?
Oh, we won, of course. Of course.
That's really hard. Yes, yeah.
There's two kinds of fights. There's one where you use your weapons and shoot beyond visual range, and then of course, Well, but then you've got rules of engagement and you've got all sorts of things going on that it's not as easy as it sounds launching a missile from a huge distance away.
Yeah.
And also you've got plenty of time to do something about it. But once you get into sort of closer ranges of visual fight, that's where it gets a bit more fun. And of course, an F4 versus an F-14. F-14 is always going to lose.
Wasn't expecting that.
But we held our own against F-15s.
Yeah.
Do you know, it's not just the aeroplane, the platform, it's who's flying it and their rules and regulations and things like that, because we're still in a training environment, so they're constrained by those. And we had a knack within the Air Force of kind of jumping in the gaps in those rules and regulations and doing things that they weren't expecting. So we didn't, we held our own.
Held your own, yeah. But what was it like, I'm guessing you probably remember, your first reheat takeoff in the Phantom? That must have been
pretty special.
What was that like?
It's of course there's all sorts of airplanes out there which will give you a big kick, but when you've come from a Hawk and jump, then your next trip is in an F4 and that burner kicks in, it's always going to be exhilarating, and it's like you always remember your first aeroplane that you flew and the rest of it, and that's the first time I sat in an aeroplane which just seemed to be a rocket to me. Lightning was probably a different class of rocket, but because that's all it was, a rocket.
It was a rocket, yeah.
But it was fabulous, amazing. Really, it's quite good.
So when you went on to helicopters, what was your I think was it Merlin you came off from when you came from F4s?
No, Wessex.
Wessex.
Yeah.
Sorry. What was that like?
Oh, I love the Wessex. I was on 60 Squadron, so I did the conversion course on 60, and then my first trip off the conversion course was straight into Northern Ireland supporting 72 Squadron.
That's straight in there, isn't it?
Yeah. And we didn't have NVGs on F4s or Hawks, so it was my first experience of NVGs on helicopters, and they were kind of the older generation ones. Hard work at night, really hard. It's a completely different way of doing things, obviously navigating at night in the dark with a green tint to everything and not having the same angles of visibility and perceptions of depth and all that kind of stuff. It's a completely different thing to get used to. So to jump into Northern Ireland, and of course you go to Northern Ireland and it's actually quite a small area to operate. So all of the crews have been there for some time. They don't need maps, they don't need, they just get told, well, we're going to here, and they know where that is and they'll head off there. But not when you've just jumped in on your first night mission and you're just kind of going, what the hell are these tubes doing on my head? And they're really heavy with the battery packs on them, and and you're very aware that it's the first time I've walked out to fly in the UK and I'm carrying a HK-53 rifle and a pistol on me and body armor. We call it body armor, but actually if you look at what body armor is these days, it was just a little vest of some description. But the threat over there was never higher. As people always used to say, the threat's never been any higher. The threat was heavy machine guns. It was IEDs, because IEDs are just as much a threat to a helicopter landing on, dropping troops off on the side of the road or picking them up, The threats were rockets and mortars and manpads and RPGs and all sorts of things. So the tactics was a very big part of the operating, and I loved that. That's what I wanted. As soon as I came off the Wessex OCF and went to Northern Ireland, saw all of this, thought that's where I need to be, that's what I need to be doing. So I came back from there, enrolled on the next tactics course and became a tactics instructor, and then went from there. And it was really important to me, and I ended up getting involved with the trials for the defensive aid systems and learning all about that, the flares, the jammers and things like this. And organising, it gave me a great opportunity to organise evasion training against fighters.
What fighters at the time?
Well, I remember phoning up the F-15 squadron at Lakenheath and saying, we'd like to do some fighter refill with you. It's called fighter evasion now, but it was fighter refill in those days. And they said, yeah, sure, what kind of helicopter are you? And I said, we're a Wessex. And it was kind of, okay, what's one of those? Well, it's like an old Sikorsky type thing. Okay, could you send us a picture? So yeah.
No.
So I sent them a picture, drew loads of guns and put AMRAAMs on it and all sorts, of course, as you do. I said, yeah, this is what we fly. And it was kind of, they phoned me up to say, seriously?
Are you kidding?
You're flying these? Flies at 90 knots, flies really close to the ground. It's green, it's flying amongst the trees. It's very difficult to find. And you can see an F-15 from a long, long way away. So it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. That was my calling, if you like. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do that. So I did Wessex for till 97, so 4 years. And then I got a call to say that there was a new helicopter coming into service called the Merlin, the Augusta 101. It's not coming into service for a while, but we need somebody to go onto the operational evaluation unit as aircrew to liaise with the factory as it's being built, and be the aircrew specialist. We'd like you to do that. So I thought, wow, this is amazing. There's a brand new helicopter coming into service and I'm the first person that's posted there to help bring it into Air Force service. So I thought, this is a pretty cool job. Of course, it was still being built and that was going to happen for a couple of years. And the Wessex was going out of service. So the boss of the OU decided to make me of use for trials and tactics courses, that I should do a Puma course as well. So even though I wasn't posted to Puma, I ended up doing a Puma conversion course, the full course. So I got about 120, 130 hours on the Puma as well.
That's not bad. But I mean, helicopters coming from fast jets, or that must be like a massive difference. And I don't know, like in my head I would want to go straight to F3, but you obviously want to go to helicopters. Like
no, well, to start with, I wanted to go Air Force. When I was joining the Air Force, when I became a navigator, I wanted to be air defence F4s. That's where I wanted to be. So I went there, and I had a wonderful time doing that. I did 2.5 tours on F4s before it went out of service. So that's what I wanted to be. But I'd done that, and I'd done 3 years on the Hawk. So
it's like a tick in the box.
It's kind of. It's not so much a tick in the box. I had a fantastic time, a wonderful time. Is the F3 going to improve on that? The F2 had come in and it was a bit horrible, and people were saying bad things about it. It's like any aeroplane that comes into service, any aeroplane, the Merlin when it came into service, any aeroplane you can say when it was coming into service, its predecessor, the crews on that type, were going, hate it, that's a whole load of rubbish. It's not as good as what we're flying now, and so on and so on. Any aeroplane gets so much grief. And the Tornado was the same. But actually, at the time, it was bad. It was bad, and I as a youngster, the thing that drew me to flying was helicopters. As a youngster, my dad was in the army. We lived out in Malaysia, where he was based, and we lived near to a field. And helicopters used to come in, and those helicopters were Scouts. They were, they were Belvederes. Whirlwinds, and those kinds of aeroplanes, and I was fascinated. As I said earlier, it's kind of, oh my goodness, you have to be crazy to fly something with those sort of blades whizzing around, the wings are whizzing around on the top. I didn't understand that as a youngster then, but that's what hooked me into flying. So I had that opportunity to switch to helicopters. I still, if the platform would have been right and the timing would have been right, I probably would have stayed fast jets. But it's just, lots of different factors all came together. Helicopters go, and I didn't look back because I had an absolutely amazing, fantastic time on helicopters.
Absolutely. And I'm going to change the subject here, but talk us through your, transition of like coming from the F4 onto being a woman, going onto helicopters. Tell us about that.
That was very delicately put, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm transgender. So I knew that before I joined the Air Force, but I had to keep it secret because in those days it was taboo and you would get thrown out. LGBT wasn't acceptable in the military. So I hid who I was, which was really, really hard, very painful. Not being able to be true to yourself, let alone anybody else. So I dealt with that until the point where it was very sad because I just got this amazing job with the OEU with Merlin coming into service. And everything about Merlin was state of the art. It was fantastic. There was from the rotor blades to what it was made out of, the windscreen, the engines, everything about it. The defensive aid systems, streets ahead of what we had on any other platform. Navigation systems had early form of, but it had digital cockpit.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was, it was an amazing thing. But at that time, things were going on in my life, which were, I eventually realised were far more important. So I had to give up this really wonderful job and tell the Air Force that, do you know what, life is what it's all about. It's wonderful flying these aeroplanes and doing this job and with all the people that I worked with, amazing people. That's great, but if I can't be myself, then what is the point? So I approached the Air Force. I went through the medical system. I'd already been actually seeing professional private medical care for a couple of years beforehand. But I went to when I thought the time was right, see the medical officer and laid my cards out on the table and said, this is who I am, this is what I want to do, I want to stay in the Air Force, I love flying, but I'm Caroline, I'm transgender, and I want to be Caroline. And the Air Force, she took it on then, which was brilliant. I chose the right person. Katie, she was wonderful. She spoke to medical policy, she spoke to legal policy, she spoke to everybody that needed to be sort of in the decision process as to whether they kept me in or not. And I was absolutely delighted when they decided that they were going to do that. They were going to keep me in. So that's when I mentioned earlier that I stepped aside for a year and a bit for an adjustment to my life. That was when that happened. So I came off the OEU, stepped away from Merlin, and that was a bit sad, really. I'd like to have stayed there, but nobody had ever done this before in the Air Force. Nobody had ever transitioned gender in the Air Force and stayed in. So we were playing it by ear. So they decided to move me. They weren't sure of medical processes and procedures and stresses and all that kind of stuff. So I moved to a ground appointment for just over a year, with every intention of coming back as soon as my med board allowed me to. So that I got away with it for 15 months, serving as Caroline until somebody outed me to newspapers, and then of course
who outed you?
I'll never know.
Very odd.
Yeah.
Who's going to out someone?
Somebody who didn't know me that well, because the information they gave to the newspapers, a lot of it was wrong. They got the name right, but they got the rank wrong and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
So because it was new, because nobody expected somebody to be able to be in the military as transgender, of course it generated a lot of media, and there was a lot of misunderstanding, there was a lot of misconceptions of what it meant, but there was a lot of bigotry as well. So I had to face up to that. And people calling for my dismissal from the military, and I'd be a liability on operations, all that kind of stuff. But I had some very good friends, and slowly people started standing up for me and I had more and more positive voices, which gave me that bit of hope. People are reluctant in those kind of circumstances. I think people are reluctant to step up and say something because they think that they're going to be tarred with the same brush, or they're going to be given a hard time themselves for standing up for somebody like that, and so on and so on, or because they're not sure themselves on whether how they should do that, whether they might cause more hurt or whatever. There's all sorts of reasons why people don't step forward, but thankfully some people did, and that made a big difference. Merlin still hadn't come into service, but I wanted to re-engage with that as quickly as possible. So I spoke to my desk officer. I was given a chance to go into any aeroplane type I wanted. He was such a lovely guy. So Merlin was my first choice. I started with Merlin. I'd like to see it back into service. So he posted me to 28th Squadron. 28th Squadron was the first squadron forming with Merlin. So I went there in 2000. And I started the process of transitioning from February 99. I ended up going back to squadron December 2000. And then we reformed the squadron in 2001. It had been in Hong Kong previously with the Wessex, the mighty Wessex. And then we worked, got the squadron ready for the aeroplane. Aeroplane came in, was on the first operational conversion course. Of course, and it had already been decided that I would be the squadron's tactics specialist. So once we did that, then it was working the aeroplane out. It was a brand new aeroplane. It still didn't have a lot of clearances. It wasn't fully operational. A lot of those clearances came as we were flying with it and learning to fly the aeroplane before the next clearance came in, and then we would learn to fly the aeroplane to those restrictions and things. So for instance, came in day only, and then it would get a night clearance, and then you start operating at night, and then you'd get a VFR clearance, and then eventually it'd get an IFR clearance. And if you wait till the aircraft to get all of those clearances and then bring it into service, you've lost 2 or 3 years of that experience.
So long, isn't it?
Yeah. So chuck the aeroplane at the Air Force, the aircrew, comes with the factory's clearances, but the factory's clearances aren't what
the Air Force wants.
The Air Force wants. Yeah. So then it's a process of working the aeroplane up as much as it's working us up. And so that was really exciting. And its first Gulf, Iraq happened in 2003. The aircraft wasn't fully operational in 2003. So we went to Bosnia instead. So Puma and Chinook went off to Iraq. We went to Bosnia. I did some quite exciting flying out in Bosnia. And we 2 years there, and then we moved to Iraq. And even when we got to Iraq, that was 2005. So I was on the first deployment of Merlin into Iraq. We took 4 crews and a half, because there's always a half on the ground. It's doing the doing the managing of the things and being the duty adult and all that kind of stuff. So we took the aircraft out there in March 2005, and the aircraft still didn't have its full clearances at that point. It was very close to it, but there was still a few outstanding. So, and it's that age-old story again, that by the time Merlin had got to Iraq, the rumour control about how rubbish it was as a platform had spread to the army, and people were saying, you don't want Merlin here, you need Chinook.
And why were people saying it was rubbish?
Because they don't know the aeroplane, and it goes back to that thing of, there's a little bit of it's a new kid on the block, and therefore it's going to get a rubbish time. And there's lots of rumours it costs too much money, and it needs like 3 engines to fly and all that kind of stuff, and it's just rumour control. But some of it's banter, and some of it's banter that's picked up by the army, who clearly didn't think it was banter, and then put a serious sort of face on it. Why can't this aeroplane do that? So we were set every test that the army could think of. When we arrived, we took 4 aircraft out there, and we were put through every possible test, and they were really difficult tests because the army wasn't going to let Chinook go until it was happy that Merlin wasn't a bag of worms and was going to be a liability to them, sort of kind of thing. And we well exceeded every single test they put out to us. Well exceeded them. So it was kind of, thank you very much, Chinook. You're cleared. You're cleared. Stand down.
It's like,
we're happy with Merlin.
Let your son take over. But I think the Merlin's quite a good looking aircraft.
Yeah, I think it's better from the back actually than the front. It looks more military from the back.
One here. I'll take some pictures.
There's one there.
Yeah,
there's one there.
Just a good looking aircraft. On
So
here,
from the back it looks a little bit more military. It's got angles and things. From the front it's a bit more like an airliner, or a heliliner. So
not a bad looking aircraft, is it?
I think it far exceeds the Chinook foo.
Oh, he's not gonna like that.
in looks. I know what he's saying right now, but no, it is a very good looking helicopter. It's a lovely helicopter.